And that is basically taking a UV model and creating texture maps to apply textures specifically to that model so everything kind of shows up in the right spot, if that makes sense. So I actually made a little tin. I haven't taken my flash drive out. I don't know why it's kicked me out of my folder. But anyway, so I'm just going to set my project into this vintage tin can thing that I made. I will open my awesome vintage can, which I made this morning. And I'm just going to assign this a new material, whatever. Cool. So I already actually have UVs laid out for this, that I thought were like fairly reasonable. Would anybody like to see me re-UV this object for like a refresher, especially since we missed last class?
Sure.
Okay. No worries. I have a tutorial, which I think just was like not uploading properly, but I'll like re-upload it. But I actually have a tutorial about how I made the can, and how I got these specific UVs. In this case, I'll just show you, I guess, an alternate way to UV this that's slightly different from what I did before. Because there's like 8 different ways to do everything in Maya, and none of them are ever wrong, more or less. Anywho. Alright, so I'm just going to do the base of this, because I don't think it makes sense to... the process for the top and bottom are like pretty much the same. So I'm just going to run with that. Also, give me 5 seconds. What have I mapped in here? I see what I've done. Tra-la-la. Alright, this is my preferred UV checker texture. I just think it's nice, like the extra colors and stuff help me figure out like where seams are. But anywho, I will get rid of the resolution gate. Alright. So one way, if you don't like starting with just like an automatic map in Maya, one other thing you can do, which I know a lot of people also kind of like doing, you can actually start with a planar map, and then just sort of cut apart the edges from there. Sometimes it ends up being a little bit less work. So just go to UV and planar. And again, if you're interested in seeing the alternate ways that I use to UV this, just check out. I'll link all the videos to you guys. But because this is literally the 3rd way I've UV this can. But anywho, so you'll notice once I throw the planar map on, you get one side that looks like pretty much perfect. It's like a great looking grid, and then the sides look like absolute trash. That is because the planar map basically just says, I am going to look at the model from one of the orthographic cameras and just project the whole, like the texture through the whole model. So what's basically happening here is that the UVs on the side are totally flat, which means it's taking a single pixel basically and just stretching it along the entire side of this object. If I tried to unfold this, unfold, nothing happens. That's because I just need to actually like cut some seams in this. So if let's see what I have open. Nothing helpful. So if I look at some of these awesome vintage tins, which like honestly, they're so good. They're so creepy. I legitimately spent about 2 hours yesterday looking at vintage tins like a crazy person. But anywho, so you'll notice that a lot of times like these tins have, I'm pretty sure the way these are made, they take like a flat or more or less flat piece of metal, and then they'll basically like fold it around into this sort of rectangular shape, take another flat piece of metal for the bottom, and then they'll sort of crimp those 2 edges together, which is why you get this like little rolled piece at the bottom, and that's usually sort of silver color. And then a lot of times like this outside part will have like this weird texture on it, and then the inside will just be metal. So you can see I kind of have that represented in the shape of my can. But in this case, what I'm going to do is use the UVing process to make the texturing easier later. So in this case, I'm just going to say, cool, maybe like this This outer face is where I want like the whatever texture design I'm going to throw on. And then everything inside that is just going to be metal. So I'm going to grab this edge here, just double click that, and then I'm going to cut that. And it's not inherently obvious that actually did anything, but you'll notice that I do now have two separate UV shells, one for the inside of my tin and one for the outside. Now, if I were to go to modify unfold, it does something, but it ain't what I'd call good. Incidentally, an example of kind of fun looking, but very bad quality UVs. You can see that there is much stretching, and things are going in all types of crazy directions. The squares up here are also really tiny, and the ones down here are really big. And this is just a matter of needing some more cuts in your model. So I think in this case, what I'm going to do, I usually just choose a sacrificial edge to be like the quote-unquote ugly edge. Since I've already set up lighting and renders in this, I'm just going to pick the one that's not facing the camera, which is usually the good thing to do. Just, like I said, you're going to have seams whatever you do, but it doesn't mean you need to stick them right in front of the camera. So if I just go through and cut that edge, if I do another unfold, you can see that it's still really janky. It's like maybe a little better, kind of. Basically what I need to do is go through and just cut out some of the edges at the bottom of this container. So I'm going to go through and cut on all the edges except maybe these guys here. And then now if I unfold this, it should actually look really nice. So you can see that I basically, I mean at this point it has, let me rotate this, make it a little straighter. So if you look at this, like pretty much all of the squares are like more or less the same size. And the amount of seams on this is minimal. So like if I'm scrolling around from edge to the edge, like no seam, no seam, no seam, and then you come here to the edge with the seam and you just have like one little seam running right down here. So a lot of UVing is just sort of seeing like where am I having super awful looking texture like texture stretching, and just sort of cutting up your model in the most discrete way possible until you get to something like the inside where it's not stretching really, really crazy. So does that make sense, like what I did for the inside? Alrighty then. And I'm going to come here down to the bottom, and again, since I want this little bottom corner thing here to be a sort of shinier metal, I'm just going to go through and cut that off. I now have a separate shell for the bottom, and a shell for the top. So if I just grab, where's my sacrificial corner? Cool. I'll just grab that whole corner. I will just cut that corner. And now if I take this and I unfold it, it'll be pretty much more or less perfectly straight-ish, kind of. And then I'll just throw that perhaps here. And then this bottom piece, again, I'm just going to do a modify unfold. And the fun thing about the bottom piece here is like you can actually more or less get away with having it as like one solid chunk of UV. Mine does a pretty good job of like wrapping it around these corners without distorting it too badly. So I usually just, like in this case, just kind of leave it be. And then I'll just grab this corner, sew that back together, and then grab the shell again and unfold it again. Again, you just, especially if there's like no point to having a seam somewhere, then like don't put it. Like if I just have a cut in my middle of my model, it's probably going to show up when I actually go to texture this. So now that I have this done, I need to get all my UVs into this checker texture, because you can see I made them freakishly enormous. So I'll just grab all the shells, go to modify, and layout. And it actually did something not completely awful, which is exciting. The one thing that, like in this case, what I'll do, since this is going to be a drastically different texture, like this is going to be like a plastic label kind of thing, and this is going to be metal, to make my life easier, I'm just going to drag this up a little bit, so that when I go into Photoshop to texture this, I just have more room to work before I, accidentally get some label color on the metal part. Does that make sense? Cool. So that's pretty much how I UV'd this. Does anybody have any questions about this? Alrighty then. In that case, give me 5 seconds to organize my source images folder. And then I will actually do things. Alright, cool. Alright, so now what you want to do, before you can make any kind of like texture for this in Photoshop, it's good to export what's called a UV snapshot, which is basically, Maya will just save an image of your UV plane like this with all your UVs in it, and you can take that into Photoshop and use it as a reference when you're actually doing UVs. So in your UV editor, just go to the Images tab, and then go all the way down to UV Snapshot. Usually the ones that I pay attention to are, the only settings I pay attention to are the image format. For the love of God, don't choose Maya if. I don't know what that's even for. I usually use PNGs because it'll give me transparency, which just makes my life easier later. And then I'm going to make this, for grins, 496 pixels big. At that point, UVs too. I will save this, and you should see, so it saved it to my images folder. You can select wherever you want. I saved it as UVs too, and I now have this wonderful blank looking PNG. There's stuff in it, I promise. But you can see it made that folder, or made that file. If I just take this, I'll throw it into Photoshop real quick, and then just apply a colored background to that. You can see that I have my UVs basically displayed now in Photoshop. So what I can do now is go in and like doodle on this, and it will show up in Maya. Text, whatever. All right, so I'm just gonna save this PSD really quick. Okay. All right. So to keep things interesting, partly for myself, I decided that it would be an awesome idea to brand this as like a random food item, and do it in the style of one of those silly, like, whatever month your birthday is corresponds to an adjective kind of deals. So, quick, I need 5 numbers between 1 and 10. I heard 73865. Alright. I'm weird about numbering. So this can will be for Little Brother's citrus eggs made with cheap onions. I don't know. I was feeling really random when I made this. That's a disgusting combination. Anywho. And then you have your choice of, bless you. So I can use, I made like some random logo backgrounds. Do you guys prefer this one or this one? This one? Sweet, thank God. Okay, because I did the other one in my other class. All right. And this is just an example because like I know, so like this is just like a pen drawing or whatever I did yesterday. Picture taken with my cell phone, actually modified with some Instagram filters. But if you guys ever want to do this for your assignments, it's totally fine. You just want to make sure that you can sort of compress the image into a format that is workable on the computer and it doesn't have like a lot of crazy shadowing. Like you'll notice there's a little shadow down here. But anywho, I just figured I'd do that for a demo just to prove that it can be done. So I'm like, yay, I have this awesome looking thingamadoodle in Photoshop. First thing I'm gonna do is find the front of my, so like this is the front of my object. So you'll look at, if I grab this face, it'll highlight this sort of section here of the UVs. So that's the one that I want to be putting my textures in if I want them to show up on the face of my object. One other thing that I also kind of forgot to mention, I showed this a little bit, but like you can kind of make like semi-modular cans. So like if I grab this guy here, I'll just do a mesh combine really quick. I can resize this to pretty much whatever size I need. By just grabbing all of the vertices on, like on the top of this, I could shrink it down. Like this, I could make it really, really skinny. So I could like kind of keep doing it like this, and just like resizing it to whatever shape I needed. The reason that you don't want to scale it is because it will crush the ever-living crap out of this pattern, like this bump on the outside of your model. But you'll notice on this one it doesn't do that. You will notice, however, when I do that, it does affect my UVs, and they're now all stretched out and weird. So there's a relatively easy way to fix that. You just want to grab the UVs, like grab these guys here, and literally just drag them in a little bit so that they maybe more closely reflect the texture of the can. You could also just unfold this again, actually. These would be very well suited to just being unfolded again. But if you ever need to change an object like this, you can just drag the UVs like this and kind of get it lined up a little bit so it's a little bit more square. Anywho, I will be working with the original can because I think the square looks nice. Alright, so the one thing you can do, and this works really well, so like, I don't know, on my personal laptop, which runs Photoshop CS6, which is like the last one before they went subscription, you can do a really awesome thing where you can actually, so you can map a PSD into Maya. So let me just resize this really quick. So I'll just be maybe like, okay, cool, here's like kind of the label on my thingamadoodle. I will save this. So if I go into my, I'll just give this a new material, new Arnold standard surface, and I'll just go through and I'll map in the color with a file shader like I normally would, and then I'll just grab Tintex1, my PSD. So Maya will totally read your PSDs, and it is a beautiful, beautiful thing. Except I noticed that in CS6, or in Creative Cloud, which is what these computers are running, it seems to do an irritating thing where like it won't let me save, like Maya has this open so it won't let me save the file. On my computer this isn't a thing. I highly recommend trying it because it's really awesome. You can just save your PSD. If it doesn't throw that error, just save your PSD and go to reload, and it will basically update the PSD to whatever the latest save is, and now like I would have that squiggle in there. Unfortunately that doesn't seem to work on these computers, so I've just been having to save like a bajillion PNGs, which makes me really sad that I have to do this, because it's really inefficient, but anywho, it is what it is. So I'll just update this and be like, oh look, there's like a giant squiggle on it. Yay, giant squiggle. So normally what you do is, does it make sense like what I did so far, how I figured out where this texture should be on the object? Like how I sort of found the front part of the UV plane. Alright. Stop me if you have questions. Anywho, so I was like, when I was looking at this in Maya, I'm like, I mean, it's kind of hard to tell because of the squiggle, but I'm like, it looks like it's a little bit too far off this edge and should maybe come back a little bit over here. So I'll just like go in and grab this and shift it over, and I'm also like, yeah, I don't know, maybe just like, cool, call that good. So a lot of times what I will do is I will sort of continually, like I'll get the positioning of one thing done, like I'll do, you know, the base logo, and then I'll just sort of keep updating that until I have something that looks good on the object, and then I'll go on to making all of the other texture, files, because what I'm going to show you guys how to do today is to map multiple stuff, or like multiple different maps into your file. So like how to make a bump map that works with your color map, maybe also do like a metalness map, that kind of thing. Yes, .png. Good. Okay, cool. And that looks weird. But I'm just going to shift this back over, hope that this looks good, and we're going to keep going. All right, so who has votes for what color this tin is? With the chartreuse again? Ah, okay. This is going to be the running joke of the class, and I kind of like it. Wait, chartreuse is just green, right? Like, that's just green? All right. What? This is not ugly green? How? Wait, okay, what if I make it more yellowy?
Yeah, like that.
Perfect. No, this is kind of nice. This is like, at least on my monitor, it's kind of like a oversaturated olive color. We're gonna run with it. Anywho, so a lot of times what I'll do, if I'm just looking for this to be like a black and white, or like a black tracing on my image, I will just set this to multiply. And then you'll notice, so I'm gonna turn off the UVs really quick. So you'll notice again, this is like, I'm gonna have to go in and adjust the levels of this, because like this edge here is like way darker because there was clearly a shadow when I took the picture. I have a weird tendency of just working somewhat destructively in Photoshop. I just save like a million layers of things. So I just made a new layer, rasterized that, and I'm just going to basically fiddle with the levels until it gets me something that looks like it doesn't leave a bunch of extra crud around the extra outside of my image. What I might also do is oh god, I don't even remember where it is. Okay, wow. I was gonna like squish this corner back in, and I'm just like, whatever. All right. So the other thing, so like now that I have this done, if I were to save this, oh my god. If I were to save this and put it back into Maya, it would basically just be this with the green. But actually, okay. So what I want to do though is add really quick in the metal texture on the inside of this can and like on this little rim at the bottom. So I can just add that in with a random block of color. So what are you guys feeling? Are you feeling like a sort of silver chrome or like a copper gold? All right then. So the easiest, sort of grossest way that I do this is literally just grab the whole bottom of this on a new layer and just be like, you guys said gold, right? This is gonna be terrible looking. I hope you're prepared. So I will just throw this in, and since this is the UVs for the inside of my box, which should be the metal color, and the the bottom rim of my box, I can just highlight this entire area, make it gold, and pretty much be good from there. And this is like where I was saying earlier, where like it's not a bad idea to shift your UVs up a little bit, because like originally this was like right next to these guys, but like since it's farther away, I can just, you know, be really careless and be like, woo, selecting, cool, and like not worry about my yellow getting up in here. So I'm just gonna turn my UVs off so they don't show up in the render. I will save this as color 3. And again, like with any luck, whatever computer you're working on will not have the irritating, your file is already opened in Maya thing that mine seems to be doing. Because it really does slow down your workflow when you have to wait for that. But anywho, so you can see now that there is this, that's actually kind of not totally horrible looking. I kind of like it. Anyway, so you'll notice that like, with pretty minimal work, there's been a texture applied to the front of this can, and then the inside and bottom little folded bits are different colors. So are there any questions on anything I've done so far? Alrighty then. Now the fun part where I'm just going to show you for like 3 seconds why I am not a graphic design major. Alright, so what are we doing right now? We're doing Little Brothers. Alright guys, what font do we want for this? Something calligraphy-esque. I like it. Alright, I'm just going to scroll through. Oh, how about Bradley Hand? how about this guy? This is, oh, that's actually, I was like, this is terrible looking. I'm like, that's actually kind of nice. I don't hate that. All right, so what color do we want for this text?
Purple.
Fantastic. How about this beautiful sort of plum color? That's impossible to see. I like it. All right. And then this is citrus eggs. That's disgusting. Citrus eggs. God. Y'all like missing out on the really, really weird stuff I put in this thing. I think one of them is I have like petrified, dehydrated, oily soap flakes. Cat. Anyway. All right. We feeling this font, or do we need a different one? Beautiful. What? All right. What are we feeling for this? How about Broadway? It's gonna be awesome. What do you think? Different color?
Red.
I heard red first. Fantastic. You know, I might actually try. Maybe I'll actually make this like not the most ridiculous red that's ever listed. No, there's no way this is gonna look good. It's fine. And then this is made with cheap onions. Made with cheap onions. I also had questionably sourced as one of the descriptors. All right. Has anyone ever did Mad Libs like Mad Libs before, or is that? Yeah. Yo, Mad Libs are amazing. I also actually really have trouble looking at this red. Like, it is making my eyes hurt. But it's okay. All right. Same font, different font. Perfect. And color? Blue. Oh God. You just like using your design courses to pick the colors that are making me to throw up looking at this. All right. So now that we have this glorious, glorious texture, perhaps just label this like text. I'll throw this in my colors folder. And then if I was so inclined, I could be like, cool, what if I color in, I'll like make this, I need this under my multiply layer. I'll just be like, yay, you know, you can just go through and like color stuff. Honestly, half the time I do line drawings, like this is how I do it. I'll just like pen and ink draw it, then color it in Photoshop, because I'm bad. I also don't have any like good colors for pencils. So, anyway, cool. So this is our incredibly classy logo that we have here. So if we save this, this is probably going to be, for the sake of demonstration, my final color map that I do. This is teamwork makes the dream work, guys, and this is beautiful. Apparently someone like Snapchatted the one that I did in my last class to people, and I was like, oh God, it's so bad. But anywho, so that should show up eventually. Ah, yes, I keep getting rid of the PNG. Incidentally, you can also just manually modify the texture path of this instead of like going in and clicking the file. So cool, here's our super great looking tin right now. So really quick, oh no, I put it on the wrong side. It's okay, that's what rotation's for. Cough. -90, beautiful. Anywho, all right, so I'm just gonna run in and do a quick render of this. And I'm going to actually, I think, because my laptop is a piece of trash, I do believe I set this to be like a 300 by 500 image. Because these computers aren't completely awful, I'm going to actually make that larger. And I'll just render that. So this is what I have so far in terms of texturing and lighting. So the background is just like a gross Lambert gray. This is just a standard AI surface shader. And then I have, I think, three lights in this scene, actually. I have one sort of orangey key light coming from here, a blue rim light, and then another like red light on this side, because I'm eccentric. I like weird colored lights. Incidentally, example of just like fill in the back of your thing with planes. It doesn't need to be super fancy, just don't have it be Maya blackness. All right, so yeah, so this is what we have so far. Now, there is totally a way that you can go in and basically make, say, these letters look embossed. And that is with what's called a bump map. So if I grab this file here, grab object, go into attribute editor. So just under my surface shader, which I'm going to call tin text. No. I'm overwriting my whole files. No. Tin. 5. Sure. Alright. So I realized that I was modifying the files I didn't want to modify. It's cool. Anywho, so if you are in your material attributes, and you scroll down to the tab that is called geometry, you will find a tab under that called bump mapping. So I'm just going to map in a checker texture to that, and you'll see that it kind of does a weird thing where it like puts some lines in. It kind of like makes some weird shadows in your piece. So that actually, let me do this with the noise texture really quick. It's kind of a little bit more obvious. But it's basically a way to fake having extra geometry in your piece. So you'll notice here's the glorious Maya noise texture. I'm gonna make this a little bit denser. And I'll show you what I'm doing here a little bit. Oh my god. Fantastic. Oh, that's so ugly. So you'll notice, so as soon as I add in this bump map, it gets like all these little white things in here. Like all these little white dots. It's actually not a sampling error. It's basically adding like fake microgeometry to this. So it's not actually, it looks kind of lumpy, but if you go in and you like look at the side of this object, like, it's not actually like changing the surface finish or like the silhouette, I guess, of this object itself. It's just adding geometry to sort of fake that this is lumpy. But with that fake geometry, it's basically reacting differently with the shine of the object. So all of these little white dots in here are actually just like shiny areas that are being reflective. And that's caused by adding the extra bump map. Anywho, so you can totally turn down the intensity on this bump map, which is a little ridiculous. So if I, oh god, where is it? Click into your noise texture, and then I think it's this lower little button up here. Yeah. I usually just click around in these until I find what I need if I forget where they are. But you'll see here there's an attribute for bump depth. I can set that lower, and it will make a much less horrific looking effect. I actually set this to -0.6, but yeah, so I mean you can see now that like if I zoom in, it's like maybe a little bit of a sort of slightly dented, slightly rough texture, instead of whatever the heck it was before when the bump depth was 1. It's not unusual to have to go back in and just like take your bump depth and set it really, really low. A lot of times they are pretty aggressive. And since it's also, I find like it's good to leave your bump maps a little bit more subtle sometimes. Since it's not actually modifying the outside sort of shape of your object or like the geometry of your object, it basically works as like the bevel or emboss feature in Photoshop, and it looks a little tacky sometimes if it's like too aggressive. Like you'll notice here, I mean like in the viewport, it's pretty aggressive and ridiculous looking, I think. But anywho, you'll also notice that like the viewport render for a bump map is not necessarily how it will look in your final render. So again, if you need to test a render, actually render it, don't trust the viewport ever. But anywho, so let's say that I wanted to maybe highlight some of the great features of this product, of this citrus eggs product. So I could go in here, so I just crammed all this into a layer, it's just color. So I'm actually going to, what I want to do is make a bump map and maybe say that these, this like text for citrus eggs and maybe like the little brothers text is embossed. So to do that, I'm just going to, I'll just duplicate my color thing. And I'm just alt dragging to do that. I'm going to, let's see here. So what I have, I'm going to get rid of this gold texture here because I don't need it for a bump map. And I'm also going to get rid of this because I don't really want this yellow thing. So all a bump map really is basically a grayscale value where 50% gray is basically saying, it's telling Maya, don't affect the way that the surface looks at all. So don't make it like raised, don't make it recessed, just leave it the way it is. Values tending closer to black is going to be like a dent or something pushed into your model, and values closer to white are going to be an embossed, raised something. So I'm just going to take this green image here. I will go into my color settings in Photoshop and just set this to hue and saturation of 0 and brightness of 50%. And then I will just apply that to here. I'm also going to turn off my image and say, maybe I do only want this citrus eggs. Maybe I only want the text to be a bump map. So I'm just going to open up all my text. And I will. I'm just going to turn all of my text white. Because I want this to be erased. So I'm going to make the value white. If I had it black, it's going to be indented into the model. So I'm going to actually, all right, cool. I might actually make this like slightly, even though this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I'm going to also give this like ever so slight bit of texture in here, just to see what happens. So I'm going to save this and just do tin, PNG. Tin bump 1. Typing is evil. All right. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to go back into my texture, break this awful noise texture. So I'll just right click and do break connection. And then I'm going to remap a file texture in. And I shall find tin bump 1. Awesome. Once that loads, it loaded. You can see it does this really awesome looking thing where it pretty much does kind of recreate the sort of bevel option in Photoshop. Somewhat aggressively. It's a little gross looking. Yeah, so I mean you'll notice like, again, this looks really, really similar to the sort of bevel option in Photoshop. One thing you can do to get slightly different effects if you were so inclined, so like right now it's like a really, really hard line in here, which actually kind of looks nice for citrus egg, so I might leave that as it is. But like for little brothers, I might maybe make that a little bit softer to change the effect. So what I'll do a lot of times is actually just, see, maybe I want this for these guys here. I fudge far too many things in Photoshop with inner and outer glows. Probably more than I should. So I usually just set it to normal. I'll color match the background because I want it to blend in with that. And I'll set the opacity to 100%. And you'll notice that when I do that, it pretty much obliterates a lot of the texture in made with cheap onions or whatever the heck it was. But it'll make this little brother's like kind of softer and a little weird looking. But it does have a little bit of a nice effect. So like if I save this, PNG bump 2, huzzah, and reload this. What am I doing? 2. All right. So you'll notice I left citrus eggs the same. But you'll notice it like changes the way that the bump behaves a little bit. It makes these like a little bit softer and kind of gives a different effect to the bump map itself. So a lot of times it's like just a cheap, easy way I'll use to texture or like to make text look a little bit raised. You can also go in and add like if I went to Google and was like, Google, show me scratch texture. See if I can find, ooh, yes, giant high res one. Has a watermark, but the heck with it. Scratches 2. Alright, so I'm just going to take my awesome looking scratches 2, drag that into, oh god it's still super tiny. All right, I'm just going to drag this in. And I will set this to multiply. Now this is going to make some like really, really, really intense bumps. So again, I'm just going to take the opacity down, perhaps to something like this. Maya will understand what this is. All right, I'm going to actually turn off that. Label your stuff, guys. All right, so I'm going to save this, and then save another PNG. So any questions on anything I'm doing so far, like while I'm just sort of saving files mindlessly? All right. Questions on how bump maps work, like how Maya reads the grayscales or anything like that? All right then. Cool. So you'll notice when I put that in, it gives me a nice sort of subtle looking maybe scratches or like dents in my model. They show up like really aggressively in the viewport here, but not so much in the render. It's like if I go in, like, oh cool, like little dents, that's like nice looking or something. So a lot of times like that's something you'll do to add sort of wear to an object. You'll add like a very slight bump map to your scratches, or very slight bump map with like little scratches or like fingerprints or stuff like that. You can add into your model to make it feel a lot more realistic. You'll just do it, you know, more carefully than whatever I'm doing right now. All right, so assuming that that's, maybe I like my bump map being the way it is, I think that looks pretty nice. The other thing that you'll notice if you look at this render is that I actually kind of don't hate the way this tin can looks, obviously, or like honestly, like it kind of has like a nice shine to the side, but like this doesn't look at all like gold at all. It's just like an awkward shiny yellow. So the one thing that I would also probably want to do is fiddle with my metalness setting. Obviously I can't use the slider because that's going to make the entire thing look metal, which is very clearly not what I want for this. So I need to make another texture map for that. In this case, it's a pretty straightforward map. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to put my scratches in this map just for grins. Did I save that? I did. Okay. So I'm just going to grab these guys, do metal, and expand this. All right, so I have my scratches here, and I have this bottom part and the top part. So what's yellow here is what I want to be metal. What I want to be fully metal, so I want a value of 1, which in colors is white. This back piece here, I want to be not metal at all, so I want that to be black. And then if I wanted to, I could, what am I doing? If I wanted to be really aggressive with my scratches, I could just invert this texture and set it back to normal from multiply. And then these scratches are going to look absolutely terrible when I do this, just for the record. It takes so long to save a Photoshop file. It's terrible. All right. Tin, metal, 1. Boom. All right. So if I just go in again and just map a file texture in, and you can map pretty much as many textures as you want, like as long as there's an open checker box, you can map a texture into it. It's not uncommon to have like a crap ton of a lot of maps for your stuff. So you'll notice that it's rendered and it's done something, which isn't quite what I want. Like clearly it's made the entire thing metal. If you guys ever import a texture and you realize like, this totally didn't do what I wanted or what I expected, under the file node where you select your texture, go down to color balance and select alpha as luminance. A lot of times that'll fix the issue. You can see in this case it did, so now the white is like displaying as, or what I colored in as black is displaying as not metal, and what I left as white is displaying as metal. You'll also notice that like all of my scratches in here, they have a pretty aggressive sort of black metal, or like a black texture to them now. That's because of the metalness. The metalness map that I just added. If I wanted to, I could grab my scratches and put them back into my color layer mess that I've made in Photoshop. And if I... Alright. This is where it always takes me like 4 seconds to remember like how to use Photoshop. So if you go to select, actually better thing. Better thing. Alright, I'm gonna grab this metal texture, I'm just gonna duplicate this, I'm gonna fill this whole thing with metal texture. Again, to be perfectly honest, I can use Photoshop and do what I need to do. I am not a Photoshop guru, so I'm probably doing some stuff really stupidly. It's a thing. If you guys ever are like, wow, that's a really dumb way to do things, I know a better way, feel free to let me know. I like learning about Photoshop. I just never have time to do it on my own time. Anyway, so I'm going to go to select color range, and then I'm just going to select a black part on this little texture, maybe set my fuzziness up a little bit, and I'll grab that, and I'll just turn that into a layer mask for this yellow. So now I should have these like horrible yellow splotches all over my color map. So if I just save this and do color 5. Yay. Yay, iterative things. Anywho, so I'm just gonna go back to my color. I'll find where I mapped in the color. So now when I map this in, once I have this yellow in here, it should create the effect of having exposed metal behind this label. And it kind of does. It looks like the label has been like chipped and worn away. So that's a sort of like relatively easy way that you can add just sort of like detail and grime to your stuff in Maya. So are there any questions on anything I've just done so far? Yeah, so I added that into the metalness texture in Photoshop. So like right here's my color map, and then here's the metalness map. So anywhere that it's showed, anywhere where I added white, so like down here, like anywhere in the scratches, Maya is going to map that in for the metalness. And then this whole texture is kind of, it's based on the UVs. So actually, wait, that's not what I want. I wanted this. Alright, bad example. But basically, if you look at the UVs for the object, and I turn on 6, there we go. It should show you the sort of how the color texture is mapped on. So basically what Maya's doing is just saying like, oh, like this face in here has like this piece of texture displayed on it, and it's just gonna like take this from whatever is in the UV space and slap it onto the face on the actual 3D model. And that's kind of how it decides what goes where. Does that kind of answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? All right. Oh, and then the other fun thing, I actually have a feeling this is going to look pretty nice on the inside of this can. But you can't see it. That's exciting. All right, well, perhaps if I... Aw, but it would have been so nice and shiny and metal. Okay. I don't know. I always really like stuff that's just like plain metal. Like, I think it looks neat. The downside of... Oh, interesting. I've totally... Oh, I see what oh, whoops. What have I done? Ah, yes, I see. When I made that new texture map, ooh, great. I accidentally got rid of half of the yellow texture at the bottom, so I'm just going to delete this layer mask, cough, and then I was like, why is the inside green? It shouldn't be green. Cool. And just make sure that whenever you save your textures, you turn off the UVs, otherwise they will absolutely show up in your renders. And it looks disgusting. Like, I've done it. I do it all the time. I like render something and I'm like, oh great, it looks awesome. Oh no, I left the UV marks in my textures and now they're like permanently attached to my object. Great. It's so exciting when that happens. Alright, so I don't know. I always really like the way the sort of scratchy stuff looks. It's like shiny and metal and ridiculous looking. Anywho. So that's pretty much that. What the heck? What have I done? That's terrible. Alright, whatever. Alright. I really like texturing. Like, old, vintage, gross stuff is, my favorite thing to texture ever. I don't know why. It's just, so fun to just, add scratches and scuffs and dents and crap. So anywho, any questions about anything I just showed you before I explain the assignment, and then I'll go and show you a few more things you can do.
Alrighty then.